Popping on. Looks good. Jump on in. Good evening, valued viewers. I'm Dr. Joaquin Acosta, your guide on this enlightening journey through the fascinating world of healthcare and wellness. As the CEO of PharmTrue and the host of this incredible Know Your Pharmacist live stream, I'm here to empower and inspire you with groundbreaking insights and compassionate care. Tonight, we're diving into a spectrum of thought-provoking topics, each meticulously selected to enrich your understanding and enhance your well-being. Our segments are more than just discussions. They're stepping stones to a healthier, more informed life. With warmth and confidence, I'm committed to connecting with each of you, sharing expertise and heartening stories that resonate on a personal level. In our Pharmacist Frontline segment, sponsored by PharmTrue, we're going to explore the critical issues affecting military families amidst the ongoing pharmacy cyber attack, giving you an example from the United States Coast Guard and what their directions are to military families. This segment isn't just informative, it's a commitment to those who serve, ensuring their health needs are not just met, but actually understood. Tech Talk is set to revolutionize your perspective on artificial intelligence and medical research. Here we brainstorm the ethical dimensions and unveil the potential of AI to transform healthcare. It's about looking beyond the horizon and bringing you the future today. Our Herbal Wellness Corner, graciously supported by High Horse Cannabis Company, takes you on an intriguing exploration of cannabis's role in the country. It's a journey of discovery where stigma meets some unfortunate circumstances, but you got to learn from history so it doesn't repeat itself. And in our community spotlight, thanks to the Big Chicken Farm, we celebrate the power of community initiatives in shaping a healthier society. It's about being a part of something greater, a movement towards collective well-being. And gentlemen, prepare for our Men's Health Minute, sponsored by Vado Speedway Park, where we delve into the crucial topic of vitamin D and its impact on aging. So engage with us, share your thoughts, and let's grow together in knowledge and in health. Welcome to Know Your Pharmacist, where each episode is a step towards a better you. Let's start this enlightening journey together. All right. So, unless you're a military family, you probably haven't seen a lot of the directives being applied to our military families for how to deal with the unfortunate cyber attack. And so this is an interesting update from the United States Coast Guard. This is how our military is being advised to get their medicine. Right, so take a look and form your own opinions before I even give my own, for sure. Because, right, so military families, hear how to fill medical prescriptions during the ongoing cyber attack by Coast Guard Operational Medicine and Quality Improvement Division. The cyber attack is disrupting pharmacy services for TRICARE beneficiaries at civilian pharmacies and military treatment facilities. Members may face delays in getting their prescriptions at MTFs, while civilian pharmacies may ask you to pay the full cash price for your prescription. However, this attack has not affected Coast Guard pharmacies. There's currently no anticipated timeline for resolving the cyber attack, which is ongoing and directed at Change Healthcare's TRICARE electronic prescription claims processor. Why is it happening? There was no direct cyber attack on the military, according to the Coast Guard. On February 21st, TRICARE's electronic prescription claim processor, Change Healthcare, was a victim of the cyber attack, preventing U.S. military pharmacies worldwide from processing prescriptions electronically. Change Healthcare is a private company that processes electronic prescription claims for many health systems, including TRICARE. So why are military pharmacies, military treatment facility pharmacies experiencing these processing delays? So, they're experiencing processing delays since the attack disrupted the normal prescription processing workflow, and they've switched to a manual process that may result in delays. In addition, non-formulary medications and medications requiring prior auth may also not be processed at this time. And what does that mean for some? Very interesting, right? And we'll definitely jump all the way in, because we got to know. So, what does that mean for me and my family, right? This is dependent on how you receive your medications. Now, if you're with the Coast Guard service members and their eligible family members who normally receive their prescriptions from a Department of Defense military treatment facility pharmacy, will still be able to do so, but should anticipate delays. Please contact your MTF pharmacy directly for specifics. So much for the Coast Guard not being affected, right? Weird. The TRICARE mail order pharmacy program through Express Scripts has not been affected, of course. If you already get your medications in the mail, you should continue to receive them without interruption. If you or your family members have been receiving scripts from a civilian pharmacy, call ahead to see if the pharmacy is able to process your scripts through TRICARE to avoid having to pay out of pocket for medication. Active duty family members who live near a Coast Guard pharmacy may be able to get their prescriptions filled there. Now, another question. I've been getting my prescriptions filled at a civilian pharmacy, but now I'm being told to pay cash for the prescription. What are my options? Coast Guard service members and their families are encouraged not to pay the cash price if the civilian pharmacy can't submit claims to TRICARE during this outage. Instead, work with your provider to have your prescription sent to a military treatment facility pharmacy or the TRICARE mail order pharmacy program through Express Scripts. Active duty family members who live near a Coast Guard pharmacy may be able to get their prescriptions filled there. Take a look. Right? Well, what does that really mean? And this is just the absolute insanity. And of course, no system wants to fall on this sword. That's for sure. And we absolutely can see that. But it's not like, things are quite what they say they are. Because, again, military pharmacies, military treatment facilities, sure, they might work with you to get your formulary meds out. But there are still occasions where, patients might have to pay cash for their medications, and that's totally not okay, right? And we look at that entire scenario, and, it just kind of begs a lot of different questions. But let's continue to kind of tug along, right? So what does this mean for my family, and how do I get my medication filled? Coast Guard service members and their eligible family members who normally receive their scripts from a Department of Defense military treatment facility will still be able to do so, but should anticipate delays. Right? Of course, we know TRICARE mail order, great. But what about this? Coast Guard family members. When they get prescriptions filled at Coast Guard pharmacies. TRICARE eligible dependents of active duty Coast Guard members may have their prescriptions filled at a nearby Coast Guard pharmacy during the outage. Your Coast Guard pharmacist will help you navigate any potential hurdles, such as medications not being available during market shortages, or perhaps just not even be able to afford them because you got to pay out of price, right? And so how many times, to my pharmacy folk, and then to my patients, how many times have you perhaps been frustrated with the situation at the pharmacy and then end up kind of drawing a conclusion, I'll just skip the blood thinner medication for now until the system works again, and then just kind of passing something off, right? Like, is that okay? And again, people actually do that kind of stuff. They're like, oh man, I'll wait for this cyber attack to be over. And we're already over a month in. We talk about medication adherence. We talk about the hundreds of billions of dollars that are absolutely, not needed to be spent if people just took their medications for all their chronic health conditions, such as high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, type 2 diabetes, But that's the hard part, is getting people to take their meds. So you add another friction point and another hurdle, right? What's going to happen? People are going to skip their meds, right? And so, again, what does that mean when little old granny's frustrated and says, screw it, And I've had this moment with patients, and it's something that you kind of got to work through together sometimes, when it's like, oh, well, I'll just die, right? I can't afford it, I'll just die. I can't get it, I'll just die. It's something that, right, is very, again, a little bit of a victim mentality there that we want to definitely, as healthcare providers, support and try to uplift and bring people out and get them the care that they need. But oftentimes, right, that support doesn't entirely necessarily go back to the pharmacy in terms of, profit, where you see pharmacies like Walgreens and, CVS. I don't think CVS has a TRICARE contract. So in this example, Walgreens, their pharmacists are likely going to be way too busy, right, to sit there and help people navigate some of these really hard issues, and that's the discouraging part of the process. So, what do? We have to continue to bring awareness to it. And, we really have to consider the fact that if our healthcare providers, if our military pharmacies all kind of work together a little bit better, no one should have to go without the medications that they need. No one should be forced or coerced into some situation where, it's just easier to avoid the situation altogether, because how many people do that? Whether it's, medication adherence, whether it's paying your bills, whatever it is, right? If it just seems like sometimes maybe an impulsive decision to just avoid it and withdraw, and it's a defense mechanism, right, for people, but how does that affect their health, right? And that's where I want to have that conversation right here, right now, because it's important. So again, if you are caught in those situations, don't give up, even if it's difficult. You gotta stay on your meds, gotta stay on your chronic meds, gotta stay on your cardiovascular meds, all of them. Don't pay cash out of pocket for these meds to make that happen, but you may have to obviously put in that extra time right now to sort out your own situations where you would think, these covered beneficiaries, TRICARE for life, would be a little bit better taken care of than left to navigate the waters with some of the murkiest, pharmacy companies in the entire universe, aka Walgreens. And mail order is really not a whole lot better, guys. You talk about continuation of care. Anytime you switch a dose, anytime you just switch to mail order to get something processed and then shipped out, there is room for error, there's room for non-adherence, and that kind of stuff sucks. And what is that a result of? The cyber attack on Change Healthcare, who also processes prescriptions for our military. But even, obviously the United States doesn't have much of a backup plan in place there, right? You should have some sort of crisis management plan, and this is exposed for the fact that we don't, even though it seems to be rather not the worst issue that it could have happened, but it is. It really is. It doesn't just, it doesn't just transact at that point right there. All right, so let's move on. Interesting, news coming out of the Pharmacy Times. FDA issuing a paper for the responsible use of artificial intelligence in medical research. Interesting, right? And, I was almost going to take back this segment today just for the fact that Elon Musk and the Neuralink, they just put up a live stream of a guy actually using Neuralink, patient number 1. And that's interesting. But I think this is a good predecessor to, what's going on there. And Neuralink did get FDA approval to at least start running their clinical trials and doing what they're doing. But we all know how monkey see, monkey do, and all of a sudden things are going to, people are going to be trying things that may or may not, right, be sketchy, to say the least. Well, anyways, the FDA, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, and Office of Combination Products have issued a joint paper that details how the FDA's various centers will collaborate to maintain public health and create responsible and ethical innovations in the face of artificial intelligence. The regulatory bodies included 4 focus areas that address the use of AI across the medical product life cycles, according to the letter. There are 4 areas of focus in the paper, including fostering collaboration to safeguard public health, advancing the development of regulatory approaches to support innovations, promoting the development of standards, guidelines, best practices, and tools for the medical product life cycle, and supporting research that is related to the evaluation and monitoring of AI performance. 4 focus areas, right? Who, is thinking about iRobot, right, and the 3 laws? Now there's 4 focus areas, right? In the movie iRobot, which is eerily kind of at least interesting in the prediction about like 2035, where you got humanoid robots getting ready to be deployed all over the world. The 3 laws there: a robot cannot harm a human being, a robot cannot allow a human being to come to harm through inaction, a robot must obey human orders except when doing so conflicts with the first law. And I guess, right, that third and a half, rule there: robot must protect its own existence, except when doing so conflicts with the first or second laws. So, of course, we're trying to establish, the 4 areas of focus for how, AI should be, handled in medical devices and things like that. This is an oddly parallel thing, so I'm going to reread the 4 areas of focus in the paper. Fostering collaboration to safeguard public health, advancing the development of regulatory approaches to support innovations, promoting the development of standards, guidelines, best practices, and tools for the medical product lifecycle, and supporting research that is related to the evaluation and monitoring of AI performance. So in the first focus of safeguarding public health, the centers are collaborating with developers, patient groups, academia, global regulators, and more to establish patient-centered regulatory approaches for health equity. As part of the focus, the agencies will be gathering input about transparency, explainability, governance, bias, cybersecurity, and quality assurance in AI medical products, as well as developing the educational initiative that promotes the safe and responsible use of AI in these products. They'll also be collaborating with globally to create standards, guidelines, and best practice on consistent use and evaluation of AI tools in the medical landscape. In the second focus area, policies will be developed for regulatory predictability and the clarity for the use of AI, including monitoring trends and issues to detect knowledge gaps and opportunities in the AI product lifecycle, developing methodology to evaluate algorithms, identify and mitigate bias, and ensure robustness of AI to coincide with changes in clinical inputs and conditions, and building upon existing initiatives for evaluation with regulation of AI according to letter. Additionally, the centers will also issue guidance on the use of AI products, including, but not limited to, final guidance on marketing submission recommendations for predetermined change, control plans for AI-enabled device software functions, draft guidance on lifecycle management considerations, and pre-market submissions recommendations for AI-enabled software functions, and draft guidance for considerations on the use of AI to support regulatory decision-making for drugs and biological products, the letter said. The centers will also refine and develop considerations for safe and ethical use of AI, including transparency in addressing safety and cybersecurity concerns and identifying best practices for long-world and real-world monitoring. Further, best practices will include documenting and ensuring that data is used to train models that is tailored to the patient population. There will also be ongoing monitoring of AI tools to ensure that adherence to standards and maintaining performance and reliability are continued. In the final area of focus, the center aims to identify different products where bias can be introduced in the AI development life cycles and how to best address it. According to the letter, it will also support projects that take health equity associated with AI into account in order to promote equity and ensure that data is representative. Finally, the centers will also support the ongoing monitoring of AI tools, the letter said, right? So you look at that whole entire situation, set up, get up, whatever you want to call it. It's just nerve-wracking because, you do see some lingo regarding, AI treating specific, let's say, treating somebody based off of their race, right, or ethnicity. And maybe there's small amounts of places in healthcare where this is, a thing, but again, where we already saw like Google Gemini really kind of, showing some interesting racial bias and some other things there, you start to wonder even how do you really actually train that correctly and efficiently, and how do you just treat a human, right, without perhaps regards to the color of their skin. And again, there's small, minute places there in healthcare where, the color of your skin, I guess, affects your physiological status, but really that's few and far between. And, so, that should almost, in my opinion, be a very small aspect of what the robot is looking at in terms of clinical evaluation on somebody, right? And so, just it's interesting, FDA and the AI, they're got to set guidelines and standards for something, or else obviously everybody's gonna be freaked out. But again, talking about cybersecurity and these robots, and Change Healthcare is absolutely exposed. Who's hurting? American military. So anyways, let's move on to Enlightenment Hour. So talking here from Dr. Caroline Leaf, Ancient Secrets for a Peaceful Life. So right now she's going to be sharing 3 mental health tips from one of her favorite philosophers, Epicurus. These tips are not earth-shattering ideas, rather they're basic, grounding ideas that we would all do well to remember, especially amidst the fast pace of technology-driven lives and ever-increasing levels of burnout and toxic stress that so many of us live under. So Epicurus was an ancient Greek scholar and sage who founded Epicureanism, a highly influential school of philosophy. He highlighted three elements that made for a good and fulfilling life, mentally and physically, all of which can help us live a healthier life today. Rule number uno, spending time with good friends. I cannot emphasize enough the powerful link between happiness and community. Research has found that people with strongest social connections tend to be the happiest. Our brains respond positively when we become active members in a community. The mesolimbic dopamine system, a system linked to addiction, lights up when we give to others, giving us a deep sense of pleasure. We're essentially hardwired to engage with and love others. One study even found that strong social relationships matter more than being a healthy weight when it comes to longevity. And the benefits of strong relationships are comparable to quitting smoking. This doesn't mean you need to be surrounded by people all the time. Rather, in fact, shows that there's a limit to how many deep friendships we can sustain. However, the key here is deep friendships. These are an intrinsic part of a fulfilling life, whether we are more extroverted or introverted by nature. Interacting with those we care about also triggers the release of oxytocin, a hormone often referred to as the love hormone or bonding hormone. It plays a crucial role in forming social connections, trust, emotional bonds, and enhances feelings of trust, comfort, and social connection, lead to positive emotions and improved mental health. Number two, the right to enjoy meaningful and purposeful work. This tip is an interesting one. It goes beyond seeing work as an economic necessity. Meaningful work provides individuals with a sense of satisfaction and deeper purpose in life, all of which contribute to better mental and physical health. It allows individuals to express their talents, skills, and creativity, fostering a sense of self-worth and fulfillment. While work that is devoid of meaning can be psychologically and emotionally taxing, leading to dissatisfaction and even mental health issues, right? I know we can all kind of see that one. And, rather than perhaps, looking at your job and maybe saying it's not a meaningful thing, it's like, what, right? What is your purpose? What makes you happy in the world? What, drives you? Can you find aspects of what you do for a living, to apply that and call what you do purposeful and meaningful work, right? Maybe, for instance, in the pharmacy industry, maybe you hate working for Walgreens, right? But if you can help people, you can find meaning in what you do, even if the system kind of absolutely tries to choke you out from being able to do so. So again, that's just one example. Other examples there, interestingly enough, we've seen this a little bit in the cannabis industry before, especially, obviously, it's an industry where I'm at now. And what's unique about it in a lot of ways is that, cannabis and people's relationship with cannabis, especially before they got into the cannabis industry, was often, more of a secret relationship, right? You end up, cannabis people hang out with their cannabis people. They don't talk about it to anybody else other than cannabis people. And then all of a sudden, here in the state of New Mexico, it goes legal and people awake with a purpose, right? To share what they love to do, right? Out to the rest of the world. It's cool. But you see, other interesting aspects there too, because, sometimes people find themselves even a little more because perhaps, working a job or working a retail job in general is not kind of your calling, right? And maybe your calling has to do with cannabis, but perhaps, right, you're able to delineate there that, hey, maybe this is where I perhaps, right, draw the line or whatever that may be on somebody's terms. And, maybe they draw those terms because the expectations were perhaps a little off. And that's not a bad thing. It's just something that we all kind of learn from. And it's interesting to see the way that, has played out a little bit in the cannabis industry because, a lot of high hopes, but there's also an intense amount of reality that, does meet those high hopes right at the front line. And again, right, cannabis is still federally illegal, one of the big things, right? And if you're not willing to deal with that, you may be facing issues. You may be facing issues with regulation. It may be taking, all kinds of different effects on your job. And perhaps maybe, being aware of that all of a sudden is something that just doesn't sit right with you, right? And all of a sudden you don't find yourself doing meaningful or purposeful work success like you thought you would in the cannabis industry. And that's just an example, right? And again, my grandma on her old little car, rest in peace, she honestly had my favorite bumper sticker in the entire world: work is a gift, give it with love, right? And so, I know that's hard for people to do, but when you can see those kind of in between the lines, right? Meaningful and purposeful work, of course, fueled by the right things. So anyways, that's some insight and examples I wanted to discuss here in the Enlightenment Hour. And number 3, and examine life built around a core value system. Epicurus encouraged individuals to critically examine their beliefs, values, and desires. The self-examination was essential for understanding what truly brings someone happiness and contentment. See, this, almost step 1 to finding meaningful and purposeful work, because you won't even know it's meaningful to you unless you do that, inner searching. And some people truly don't even believe in that because, the weight of the world does not quite encourage it by any means. But Epicurus figured it out a long time ago. The self-examination was essential for understanding what truly brings someone happiness and contentment. And by questioning and reflecting on one's own life, people could identify and eliminate unnecessary desires and anxieties that might disrupt their inner peace. This means being intentional about what we want and what we believe in. We should be open to exploring the world and learning about the meaning of life, as well as willing to question the beliefs we hold and how these interact with the way we have chosen to live our lives. Do these beliefs reflect who we are and who we want to be? If not, what needs to change? It's important that we take time to reflect and question what guides our thinking, feeling, and choosing, as research shows that living a life that doesn't align with our core values can be very detrimental to our brain health and longevity. As cliche and as stoic as all of that sounds, there's nothing wrong with, cliches or stoicism. Nothing wrong with taking the extra time to do that extra work. But what you gotta do is that, right? Nobody, as much as you perhaps may be led to believe, nobody else can develop your own inner core value belief system other than yourself. You can cherry pick and things that you like from other people, right? But at the end of the day, you want to go and be somebody else, you can only be yourself, right? So figure out who you are, right? And so, it's just an interesting, set of 3 awesome rules from Epicurus that, honestly, I think if everybody somehow had an ability to take a couple days of their time to stop and reflect on that, which I understand the aspects of a busy life, again, might find a lot more purpose in your days, for sure. All right, so let's jump into our Herbal Wellness Corner, brought to you by High Horse Cannabis Company, guys. High Horse Cannabis Company, shop them. We got all the best deals right now, March Madness and Saturday, and it's going to be a great day. We're going to be having a block party over at the North Main store. I'm going to be giving free, pharmacist, medication, therapy management consultations, clinical cannabis consultations if you need them, blood pressure and blood sugar screenings. We're going to take a whole nice look at it and just be available. That's what we are there for. So anyways, breaking it down to the history of cannabis a little bit, guys, and some interesting stuff here I kind of want to share because, yes, we take a look at the basically prohibition, right, of cannabis here in the United States. There is one man, right, and this is coming straight out of a book called Cannabis: A History. And this is a pretty interesting, little scenario here because I don't think many of us perhaps knew about Harry J. Anslinger. So he has been pilloried as the man who single-handedly made marijuana illegal in the United States, but it's false. He didn't instigate anti-cannabis policies or prohibition, which already existed, but he did mastermind a very efficient national campaign that was to do much to determine public attitudes towards cannabis and other drugs for over 3 decades. As such, he is probably the most important player in the history of both American and international anti-narcotics law enforcement and legislation. He was born Harry Jacob Anslinger on May 20th, 1892 in Altoona, Pennsylvania, the 6th of 9 children in a working-class family. His father, Robert J. Anslinger, was a Swiss immigrant who worked as a barber and later as a railroad security guard. His mother, Rosa, was of German descent. The family had immigrated to America in about 1885. Harry was their third child to be born in the US of A. At the age of 20, to earn money to support himself, through his course majoring in agricultural business studies at the Department of Agricultural Economy and Rural Sociology and in the College of Agricultural Sciences of Penn State University, Anslinger worked as a trackside maintenance laborer on the railroad, reporting anything suspicious he might see to the senior railroad security captain, who was also his father's superior. Several years later, when the security captain appointed a fire marshal, he was employed the newly graduated Anslinger as statistician and arson investigator. Upon the USA entering the Great War in 1917, Anslinger was not drafted into the services on the account of being blind in one eye, the result of a childhood stone-throwing incident with his brother, and was instead employed in War Department in Washington overseeing government ordnance and contracts. He then transferred to the State Department, and being a fluent German speaker was sent in 1918 to The Hague in Netherlands, where he joined the American Embassy. Part of his responsibilities being to gather intelligence of both military and commercial value. 3 years later, he passed the necessary examinations and was promoted to vice consul in the German seaport of Hamburg, where he discovered American merchant seamen being bribed to smuggle drugs in the USA. This was not, however, Anslinger's first encounter with narcotics. According to his own account in a book he published in 1961 entitled The Murderers, The Story of Narcotic Gangs, Anslinger first came across drugs as a boy when he was sent on an errand to a pharmacy to fetch morphine for an addicted neighbor, and later lost a choir boyfriend to opium smoking. From Hamburg, Anslinger was posted as consul to La Guaira in Venezuela, and in 1926 to Nassau in the Bahamas. In the former, he investigated pearl smugglers, but in the latter, he was to come across far bigger game: European merchant vessels running alcohol into the USA in defiance of prohibition. Meeting with other consuls, he persuaded the British, Canadians, French, and Cubans to combat this rum running, as it was termed. This success prompted the United States Treasury Department to appoint him as the head of Foreign Control Section of their Prohibition Unit. In 1929, he was promoted to the post of Assistant Commissioner. The Prohibition Unit had been investigated in 1919 out of a narcotics department founded in 1914 by the Inland Revenue Bureau of the United States Treasury Department to collect taxes and enforce law as laid down by the Harrison Act. It was renamed the Prohibition Bureau in 1927. Within the Prohibition Unit, a separate narcotics division had been founded by Colonel Levi G. Nutt. His reputation and that of many of his fellow officers was to be ruined in 1930 by allegations of sleaze involving the fixing of arrest records in association with the New York Jewish mobster and gambler Arnold Rothstein. Nutt was transferred to a regional alcohol taxation office. The scandal prompted a government reassessment of the situation, and Republican Congressman Stephen G. Porter, a longtime congressional expert on narcotics and a member of the American delegation to the Geneva Opium Conferences, persuaded a large number of his fellow congressmen to support his move to set up a new Bureau of Narcotics within the U.S. Treasury Department. I promise this is going somewhere. On August 12th, 1930, his plan was adopted and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics came into existence. Porter, who was a congressman for Pennsylvania, didn't live to see his achievement, for he died of cancer on June 27th in Pittsburgh. Then Anslinger was appointed the first commissioner of the FBN. His appointment ratified by President Herbert Hoover the following month and confirmed by the United States Senate in December, and it seems likely that Porter had put Anslinger's name forward for the latter's wife, Martha Denniston, and was politically connected to her uncle Andrew Mellon, who was Secretary of the Treasury, and moreover, her family were exceedingly wealthy steel mill owners and major contributors to the Republican Party. A staunch Republican himself, Anslinger received a salary of $9,000 per annum and the brief to supervise, regulate, and enforce the law concerning both illicit and licit habit-forming drugs in the USA, and he remained on his post until 1962. So with hindsight, Anslinger had all the attributes for the job. He was diligent, trustworthy, incorrupt, a skillful diplomatist, an expert judge of character, and a loyal civil servant. He was also said to be, especially in his later years, frightening in appearance. His square head was out of proportion to his body. He had huge ears and his eyes could be staring. In short, he looked the part of a tough lawmaker and drug buster, this manifestation of commanding power filtering down through his organization. So where cannabis was concerned, Anslinger was to develop a fixation. He was sincere, but he was out to get the drug and all those connected with it. almost at any cost, and often with blunt disregard for the truth of any facts that were contrary to his argument. To his advantage, the government gave him and the FBN a free rein for many years and did not discourage him from stepping outside the law in his crusade. It is said that during Franklin D. Roosevelt's first term as president, Lewis Howe, a presidential advisor, told Anslinger that were he ever to recommend the president to show clemency for a drug dealer, he could append his resignation to the document. Ultimate triumph in the war on marijuana side. Anslinger had another goad to success. It was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, run as a bureaucratic fiefdom by his adversary in law enforcement, the devious and secretive J. Edgar Hoover. The rivalry between the two men went to extremes. Hoover, cautious of the murky world of narcotics and its potential to corrupt FBI agents, preferred to go after high-profile criminals such as gangsters, whose arrests were made good publicity. Anslinger was forever seeking to emulate this, to raise awareness of the FBN both with public and in government circles, and inevitably there was much rancor and hatred between the two men, each creating his own bête noire to grab headlines and the moral high ground. For Hoover, it was political enemies of the state, and for Anslinger, drug addiction and its handmaiden, organized crime. Two ego dudes battling to, ideally save the world, but what were they really fighting for, right? And so, anyways, Hoover was to win this struggle for supremacy by the way of publicity. His targets, Nazis, communists, civil rights activists, spies, were seen as more important and romantic in the public eye than Anslinger's poor Mexicans, ghetto blacks, and other cannabis-smoking social outcasts and non-descripts. To address the shortfall in his drive for publicity, Anslinger worked upon marijuana, building it up in the public consciousness into killer weed. Such statements as if the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster marijuana, he would drop dead of fright, which he declaimed in the Washington Herald in 1937. His intention was to strike fear into the heart of the American man in the street. It worked. Yet, when the first becoming head of the FBN, Anslinger, had been dismissive of the federal ban on cannabis, and at the time, he simply did not see it as that great of a threat. From the start, Anslinger revolutionized the approach to law enforcement, deploying undercover agents and setting up intelligence gathering networks in the USA and overseas. At first, concerned primarily with the enforcement of the Harrison Act, his attention was then drawn to the use of cannabis in the southwestern states, but he did not take the situation too seriously. Only Mexicans were involved, and containing them was not difficult. What was more, as there was no federal cannabis law, there was little he could or should do. Some attempts have been made to attach cannabis to existing federal narcotics legislation, and in 1929, a number of congressmen, led by a Texas senator, approached Anslinger to append it to the Harrison Act, but this was opposed on the grounds that hemp was a domestic agricultural crop and it was impractical to attempt to control interstate commerce in it. The federal government did, however, take some action that year in establishing two centers called farms at Lexington, Virginia, and Fort Worth, Texas, for the treatment of federal prisoners who were addicted to, as it was put, habit-forming narcotic drugs, including Indian hemp. There was another reason for Anslinger's reluctance to address cannabis. It was manpower. He knew he would need more agents to combat a drug so commonly used against Mexicans and blacks. In the early years of the FBN, he had only 300 full-time agents at his command, and they were needed to combat opioids and cocaine. Consequently, he suggested individuals tackle their cannabis problem according to its severity. This was all very well for most states, but those in the Southwest, where marijuana use was widespread among ethnic minorities, pressured for federal legislation. The press and concerned citizens took up the call, driven not only by their zeal, but also by their anti-Mexican attitudes, which were strengthened during the Depression when jobs were scarce and migrants were seen to be stealing work from the white workforce. Wow. Mexicans were accused without any justification of spreading marijuana across the nation. State marijuana laws were often used as an excuse to deport or imprison innocent Mexicans. Resistance to arrest was put down to marijuana-induced violence or frenzy. Marijuana was used yet again to attack Mexican cheap labor. In California, where there was by now a substantial Mexican population, the missionary educator movement and the American Coalition of Patriotic Societies lobbied the state government. A leading member of the latter, C.M. Goethe, announced in the New York Times in 1935, marijuana perhaps Now, the most insidious of our narcotics is a direct byproduct of unrestricted Mexican immigration. Easily grown, it has been asserted that it had been recently planted between rows in a California penitentiary garden. Mexican peddlers have been caught distributing sample cannabis cigarettes to school children. He had no justification for this by now well-worn accusation. Newspapers, particularly those owned by William Randolph Hearst, who was a racist, made much of the supposed Mexican threat. Such sensationalist and unprincipled coverage even earned its own sobriquet of yellow journalism. It was Hearst, or more accurately his newspapers, which popularized the word marijuana, spelt at the time with an H. Prior to the 1930s, those who knew of the drug and were neither Mexican nor black usually referred to it as hemp. Marijuana, as it gained common parlance, came to stand for a criminal substance, a foreign drug set to undermine mainstream American culture. Anslinger, who maintained a very substantial file on marijuana, even though he was not initially involved in legislating for it, attempted to historically link the word marijuana to the Aztec Indians of Mexico. Almost sounds like the word Voldemort, right? He who must not be named. It just has a nasty tone to it. According to his argument, cannabis was called Maliua or Maliuan in the Nahuatl, the Aztec language. This was, Anslinger claimed, constructed of a noun malin, a prisoner, the preposition hua, of or suggesting a property, and the verb ana, to capture or to take or to grab. Therefore, Malawanan, sometimes spelt Milanawan, meant the prisoner taken captive by the plant. In other words, an addict. Within 2 years of the establishment of the FBN, it was in trouble. The Depression caused a considerable fall in tax revenue and government spending plummeted. The FBN budget was substantially cut, and in order to boost his organization, Anslinger had to find a new target, a new drug menace upon which to peg a budget increase. Although he had previously given marijuana little thought and deferred putting it under federal legislation, he now set about demonizing it, circulating pamphlets and planting stories in the press about murders committed whilst under marijuana intoxication. He also started pushing for marijuana to be included as a dangerous drug alongside opioids and cocaine in the Uniform State Narcotics Act, then widely under consideration by a large number of state legislators. Under these, there would be a standard approach to non-federal narcotics legislation nationwide, each state having the power to make arrests for possession and use of restricted substances, closing a drugs taxation loophole in the Harrison Act. There was another motive to Anslinger's actions. If marijuana was legislated against at state level, it would relieve the FBN of some responsibility for it and therefore free up a part of the budget. In time, Anslinger won the day, aided by the press, especially the Hearst newspapers, which whipped up public opinion. Eventually, by 1936, 38 states would add marijuana to the most dangerous drugs list under the Uniform State Narcotics Acts. Those remaining still passed some legislation governing the sale or possession of it. The American public was ripe for anti-marijuana press exploitation. Prohibition had been extremely unpopular, and anything that diverted attention away from it was welcome. Apart from not being able to get a glass of whiskey, the public was also worried by the crime wave Prohibition had set in motion. Indeed, it gave a far greater boost to organized crime than anything ever before. In 1933, when the Volstead Act was repealed, the emphasis switched from alcohol to drugs, not just in law enforcement, but also in law breaking. Prohibition had another effect that concerned legislators. The well-to-do who had been used to a cafe and cabaret society life before Prohibition took to speakeasy bars and secret drinking dens where they not only drank illicit booze, but also came into contact with criminals. And the music of the speakeasy was jazz, and the players often which used marijuana. The link was made. Furthermore, not only the temperance and anti-narcotics organizations grew worried when Prohibition was lifted, the brewers and distillers became concerned that marijuana, cheap and easily grown, would dent their profits. Marijuana therefore posed not only a legal but also a commercial quandary which had to be tackled somehow. Toward the end of 1934, Anslinger himself came under censure. He had faced the threat of losing his position in 1933 when Roosevelt won the U.S. presidency and set in motion his democratically biased New Deal, under which all government employment was scrutinized. Any whiff of favoritism was being sniffed out. Anslinger's wife's family connections had placed his job in jeopardy. Now he was facing outright dismissal, not only running of the FBN, but also because of an uproar created in Pennsylvania by black community leaders who objected to Anslinger referring to a colored man in one of his anti-marijuana pamphlets as a ginger-colored N-word. He survived, but only because of his support base of editors, hardline congressmen, and some senior pharmaceutical industry figures. Fast forward 100 years, and where are we now, right? Anyways, late in the year, under pressure to be seen, to be proactive, Anslinger began to focus on marijuana, writing articles about how it induced rapes and murders in which perpetrators were almost always black or Mexicans and the victims almost always white. These were issued by the FBN to the press or sourced by the newspapers to Anslinger. Not surprisingly, public awareness of marijuana increased very sharply, and a wide range of lobby groups such as the YWCA and YMCA, the Women's Christian Temperance Unit, and the National Association of Parent-Teacher Associations joined in the demand for the drug to be included in the Uniform State Narcotics Acts. FBN annual reports, which had hitherto concentrated on opioids or cocaine, suddenly started to concentrate on marijuana. The 1935 publication held 13 pages on the subjects with photographs. The anti-marijuana bandwagon was now on the road, and the United States Treasury came under pressure to federally legislate against it. The anomaly being widely voiced that opium and cocaine, which were produced in foreign countries, were banned, but a homegrown drug, purportedly just as insidious, was not. Although he had originally been keen on state legislation, Anslinger was quick to appreciate the advantages of federal lawmaking. It would very considerably raise the FBN arrest rate, giving the organization a higher standing both in public and government eyes, consequently generate a greater budget. So he increased his efforts. So did the press. In 1936, a story went out that is typical of the coverage. Issued by the Universal News Service, it read in part, "Murders due to a killer drug, marijuana, sweeping the United States. Shocking crimes of violence are increasing. Murders, slaughterings, cruel mutilations, maimings done in cold blood, as if some hideous monster was amok in the land. Much of this violence, what experts call marijuana. It is another name for hashish, a roadside weed in almost every state in the Union. Those addicted lose all restraints, all inhibitions." Insane, right? They become bestial demoniacs, filled with a mad lust to kill. Those are some headlines, man. I'll tell you, Anslinger, man, he should have just perhaps created a product and decided to sell that. Maybe he would have even made more money. That was a way with words. Also released at about the same time was a letter Anslinger received from Floyd Vasquez, the city editor of the Daily Courier in Alamosa, a small town in Colorado halfway between Denver and Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was an agricultural letter with a substantial Mexican migrant labor population. The letter reported the story of Lee Fernandez, who had been responsible for a wave of rapes and murders across southern Colorado. There was no proof that Fernandez had used marijuana, although the odds are that he did. No link between the drug and his one-man crime wave existed. Nevertheless, it was considered enough, as Basket stated, that he was a Spanish-speaking person, most of whom are low mentally because of social and racial conditions. As if press coverage were not sufficient, Anslinger's campaign spawned several anti-marijuana movies, although several silent 2- and 3-reelers had appeared on the subject in the 1920s. Marijuana, released in 1935, had the tagline, "Weird orgies, wild parties, unleashed passions." Another film of the same title was made in Mexico, directed by Jose Boer soon afterwards. The most famous, widely distributed, was Tell Your Children, also entitled Reefer Madness, The Burning Question, The Dope Addict, Doped Youth, and Love Madness, released in 1936 and directed by Louis J. Gassner. The narrative, as told to a PTA meeting by a high school principal called Dr. Carroll, centered around May and Jack, played by Carlton Young, who was later to star with John Wayne in the seminal western The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. May and Jack introduced their fellow students to marijuana, and the lives of all are shattered, especially that of one who is committed to an insane asylum for life. The film was partly financed by a major distilling company, of course, which would have lost a considerable income if it had marijuana become more popular than alcohol. The following year, Assassin of Youth was released, starring Dorothy Short, who had appeared in Tell Your Children. It was about a high school girl involved with teenage marijuana smokers and a report who poses as a soda jerk to infiltrate this ring of teenage dope fiends. A line that Young's character in the Western was to utter 26 years later might well have applied to Anslinger, his campaign, the press coverage of marijuana, and the marijuana movies. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. All this publicity strengthened the bond between marijuana, crime, and violence. It was compounded by arrested criminals agreeing in their confessions that marijuana had played a part in their crime in the hope of a reduced sentence. Of course, whenever violence and marijuana were mentioned in the same sentence, the myth of the assassins was resurrected as cast iron proof. One story in particular was repeated time and time again by Anslinger. It concerned a young man called Victor Licata, who came from Tampa, Florida. Age 21, Licata murdered his parents, two brothers and sisters, with an axe, allegedly claiming to the police that he had done so when he termed what a marijuana dream. It was said Licata had been smoking marijuana for 6 months and that Licata had already been subject to a police attempt to have him committed to a mental asylum, which his parents had contested whilst agreeing to look after themselves and subsequently found under psychiatric analysis to be criminally insane. According to the psychiatric's report, frequently subject to hallucinations accompanied by homicidal impulses was ignored. When he was finally incarcerated in a mental institution, he was diagnosed as suffering from probably inherited dementia, praecox with homicidal tendencies. Not to mention, no mention is made in his records of cannabis. Not only violence was associated with marijuana, so was sex and promiscuity. In the International Medical Digest in 1937, an article headed "The Menace of Marijuana" recounted how a boy and a girl had lost their sense of smell completely after smoking marijuana, actually eloped and were married. Another piece published in the same year spoke of high school pupils meeting to smoke marijuana and dance, and then suddenly after the time, girls began to pull off their clothes, men weaved naked over them. Soon the entire room was one of the wildest sexuality. Ordinary intercourse and several forms of perversion were going on at once, girl to girl, man to man, woman to woman. Quite possibly there was yet another reason for outlawing marijuana. According to Jack Herer, a leading American marijuana activist and the author of seminal marijuana text, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, there were economic as well as moral considerations at play. He believes hemp products pose a threat to the established financial and industrial interests. There is much of a conspiracy theory about his premise, but it is also not at all outlandish. He argues that the petrochemical and pulp paper industries stood to lose billions of dollars if the commercial potential of hemp was fully realized. Experiments such as those being carried out by the Ford Motor Company were underway to develop synthetic products from renewable resources, especially hemp, instead of fossil fuels. Possibilities being that hydrocarbons of hemp could be used instead of petroleum hydrocarbons. Herer names William Randolph Hearst and Lamont DuPont, head of multinational pharmaceutical petrochemical conglomerate that bore his name, as the main orchestrators of the anti-hemp movement. And at the center of that hypothesis was the invention of the hemp decorator, a machine that could strip hemp fiber without retting, making it feasible to use hemp on a large scale. Many inventors since the time of Thomas Jefferson had come up with hemp processors, but the only decorticator patented on the 1st of July 1919 by George W. Schlichten worked effectively at an industrial level. It was able to strip the fiber from virtually any plant, the pulp known as herds, discarded for any alternative use that might arise, and the fiber ready for treatment. The first decorticator went into operation in a spilling mill owned by John D. Rockefeller. He tried to buy the patent rights, but Schlichten rebuffed him. The economic downturn caused by the Great War also discouraged investors. Yet one, Harry Timken, the owner of Timken Rolling Bearing Company, wanted to develop it and saw its potential as a provider of not only fiber but also paper pulp. He arranged a meeting with Edward Scripps and the proprietor of Scripps Newspaper Company in San Diego. Scripps owned massive timber interests in the states of Washington and Oregon, and it did not take a genius to realize with the decorticator in operation the need for wood pulp, in which an industry not only Scripps but also Hearst had a substantial holding in addition to forest industry interests, would be much reduced. Something had to be done to stymie the industrial march of hemp, and so between 1935 and 1937, DuPont persistently lobbied Herman Oliphant, chief counsel of the United States Treasury Department, Andrew Mellon, by now Secretary of the United States Treasury Department, and not only Anslinger's uncle-in-law, but also DuPont's baker, also piled on the pressure for federal legislation. He too had vested interest in seeing hemp suppressed, as he was a major shareholder in Gulf Oil and a huge coal mining concern in Pennsylvania. Not to mention a number of utility companies. Whether or not Herer is right in his assumption is perhaps immaterial. What is the fact is that there was much hypocrisy being exercised in the marijuana debate. The marijuana propaganda may have made for salacious press stories, but marijuana throughout the 1930s is essentially unimportant. People didn't bother about it. Far from there being an epidemic of marijuana use, it was rarely seen outside of the world of seamen, cowhands, jazz musicians, working class blacks and Mexicans, and gangsters. The spreaders of alarm and despondency produced no scientific evidence to support their claims, although this did little to dilute the reputation of the killer weed that drove you mad. Other voices of moderation spoke out, they were suppressed or dismissed. Anslinger discouraged any unbiased scientific investigation or evaluation. He even prevented marijuana from being provided to respectable research institutions for the purpose of research. From the mid-1950s onwards, he engaged upon a vigorous and sustained anti-marijuana campaign without a reasoned justification other than his personal prejudice. With few experts able to counter his claims, he was at liberty to preach as he pleased. Only once in the winter of 1936 did he allow in a letter to the magazine publishers P.F. Collier and Son that there was no solid proven link between crime and marijuana. Not satisfied with his national anti-marijuana stance, Anslinger also started to work on an international campaign, knowing that once marijuana was banned by international law, the United States of America would have to comply with it. At the Conference for the Suppression of Illicit Traffic and Dangerous Drugs in Geneva in 1936, Anslinger urged international control of cannabis, but other countries rejected his approach on the grounds that there was insufficient evidence to support his claims of the drug's inequity. The following January, however, the United States Treasury Department held a conference on cannabis. At this, Anslinger trotted out all the horror stories in his repertoire and stepped up his campaign by accepting speaking engagements all over the United States of America. All set to drafting a bill against cannabis based on the Harrison and National Firearms Act, applying a punitive transfer tax on marijuana as existed on automatic machine guns. It was the only way to address Anslinger's demands within the United States Constitution, the bill known as the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. The various preliminary hearings for the proposed bill commenced in April 1937, and Anslinger repeated his shock stories and with no qualifications whatsoever gave his own medical opinions now of the dangers of marijuana and went so far as to state to the hearings, here we have a drug that is not like opium. Opium has all the good of Dr. Jekyll and all the evil of Mr. Hyde, and this drug is entirely the Monster High. No valid statistic or scientific evidence were put forward, and the expert witnesses called all but perjured themselves. Considering lying under oath, right? Come on, Anslinger. So when Anslinger asked Dr. Carl Boecklin, chief of the Division of Pharmacology on the National Institute of Health, if insanity was produced by smoking marijuana, the answer came back, I think it's an established fact that prolonged use leads to insanity in certain cases. Witnesses called to speak against the bill included Ralph Loziers of the National Oil Institute, who complained both provisions were too sweeping but accepted the principle. The representative of a major birdseed manufacturer who laid hemp seed was incomparably the best birdseed available. Consequently, hemp seed was under the Marijuana Tax Act and remains so to this day. However, the seeds had to be denatured and sterilized before sale. Only one voice was in serious opposition to the bill. Dr. William C. Woodward of the American Medical Association was a lawyer as well as a physician and no friend of Anslinger. Through the Harrison Act, FBI agents had apprehended or threatened thousands of doctors, often on Trump prescription charges. Dr. Woodward stated openly that whole hearing process was biased. There was a lack of scientific proof for the claims being promulgated. Witness testament was vague, and the assumption that the medicinal use of cannabis was responsible for the marijuana menace was unfounded, and it was all being rushed through without undue haste. Although he concurred with the need to regulate marijuana, Woodward was also at odds with Anslinger on another point. Where Anslinger saw marijuana users as dedicated criminals, the doctor regarded them as patients in need of treatment. That the AMA was mostly Republican and the administration predominantly Democrat did not help. The AMA objections were overruled, and when the Senate committee debated on the bill, the passage was given a smooth ride by the chairman, who was a close friend of DuPont's. The bill finally reached the floor in Congress for ratification at the very end of a Friday afternoon session, by which many at the time of the legislators had gone home for the weekend. The debate lasted a matter of minutes. The speaker, a long-lasting Texas Democrat, Sam Rayburn, seemed unsure what the bill was about, and no vote was taken. Instead, the teller system was used, whereby congressmen walked past the teller, who counted the number of people going by him. Only Republican congressmen from New York raised any questions. When he inquired as to what the AMA thought of the proposal, a Democrat supporter replied, "Their Dr. Wentworth came down here. They support this bill 100%. He even got the doctor's name wrong." So then the Marijuana Tax Act, signed by President Roosevelt on the 2nd of August, came into effect on October 1, the federal legislation controlling cannabis. Under the new law, any person cultivating, transporting, selling, prescribing, or using marijuana had to be registered and pay a tax levy of $100 an ounce every time the drug changed hands. Industrial use, the level was set at $1 an ounce. To give this some perspective, the price of a brand new Ford Model Y saloon car in the 1937 was $205. In theory, the act was a piece of revenue legislation and any infringement, a tax violation, not a narcotics one. Yet the aim was clear: to control the social use of marijuana. In fact, it was a prohibition and unconstitutional in that the substance itself was not proscribed, just made all inaccessible by repressive taxation. The act might have been aimed at the non-existent drug scene, but it hit hardest at the legitimate hemp farming industry. Although this had been shrinking in size over the years, the act dealt a death blow, depriving American farmers who had been hard hit by the depression of what could have been a new multi-million-dollar cash crop. The Schlichten's corticator, which the inventor had been refining and improving ever since he registered the patent in 1919, hemp could have made the U.S. self-sufficient in natural fibers and reduced, if not removed, the reliance of imported fabric and threads. Yet the Marijuana Tax Act killed off any chance. Not only was the hemp industry ruined, so too was Schlichten, who lost all his money and never saw his machine in widespread use. As for any wild hemp plants, Anslinger set about eradicating them too, with the nationwide itinerant gangs of laborers. In 1938, Canada prohibited cannabis cultivation, and the aim there was to not raise revenue, but to prevent the leisure use of marijuana. Doctors were still permitted to prescribe tinctures of cannabis, but the bureaucracy that came with every prescription discouraged many from offering it to patients. What further stopped it from being prescribed was the imposition of marijuana tax acts south of the border, for most medicinal cannabis was grown in Florence, South Carolina, and was hit by the new regulations. 3 years later, just before the USA entered the Second World War, cannabis was dropped from the American Pharmacopoeia. It is said at Anslinger's request. Although American doctors were still theoretically allowed to prescribe medicinal cannabis, they did not because of the overregulation and cost of the tax. So with the Marijuana Tax Act in full force, Anslinger faced the problem of controlling the traffic in a substance that was more readily available than any other drug. Indeed, it was a weed, and any number of clearance gangs could not totally eradicate it. He also privately admitted that heroin was far more dangerous and far more easily controlled, yet marijuana served its purpose. The FDM budget was substantially increased as he embarked once more on a campaign of marijuana vilification, appealing to the nation to help him. His utterances to the press on the radio were in the best traditions of yellow journalism. In what has become his most famous article, Marijuana, Assassination of Youth, published in the American Magazine a few weeks before the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, he wrote, "The sprawled body of a young girl lay crushed on the sidewalk the other day after a plunge from a fifth-story Chicago apartment house. Everyone called it suicide, but it was actually murder. The killer was a narcotic in America known as marijuana, and to history as hashish. It is a narcotic used in the form of cigarettes, comparatively new to the United States, and has a dangerous coiled rattlesnake." He continued with the Lakota story before introducing a new case. In Los Angeles, a youth was walking along a downtown street after inhaling a marijuana cigarette. For many addicts, merely a portion of a reefer is enough to induce intoxication. Suddenly, for no reason, he decided that someone had threatened to kill him and that his life at that very moment was in danger. Wildly, he looked about him. The only person in sight was an aged bootblack. Drug-crazed nerve centers conjured the innocent old shoe shiner into a destroying monster. Mad with fright, the addict hurled to his room and got a gun. He killed the old man and then later babbled his grief over what had been wanton, uncontrolled murder. "I thought someone was after me," he said. "The only reason I did it, I had never seen the old fellow before. Something just told me to kill him, and that's marijuana." The hysterical approach in passing of the new act were to prove problematic for Anslinger. First, as he increased his warnings about the supposed menace, so the public came to believe him and demand more arrests, which were not forthcoming. Secondly, he had, by his ranting, alienated a large section of ethnic minority population of the United States of America, which was, marijuana aside, largely law-abiding. This in turn caused them to be secretive and closed. Third, with marijuana use widespread in certain geographical areas and social areas, the FBN found itself underfunded and understaffed at a local level to deal with the situation. From the very beginning, enforcing the Marijuana Tax Act was a lost battle. Dubious honor of being the first person arrested under the act fell to 58-year-old Samuel Caldwell, who was tried in Denver, Colorado on October 8th of 1937, accused of selling a small amount of marijuana to Moses Baca, age 26. The presiding United States District Judge was J. Foster Symes. Anslinger was also present in court. Caldwell was fined $1,000 and sentenced to 4 years hard labor in the infamous United States Federal Penitentiary, Leavenworth, Kansas. Baca got 18 months in the same jail. It was not long before another dilemma faced Anslinger. Defense lawyers started arguing that their client's crimes had been marijuana-induced, the plea being one of marijuana insanity and temporarily diminished responsibility. The attorneys cited Anslinger's article, Marijuana, Assassin to Use, arguing the logic that the users themselves were victims of their circumstance, since, as Anslinger himself had declared, marijuana was the source of the criminality. Defense lawyers were further aided, and the marijuana's poor reputation further strengthened by Anslinger's public statement that marijuana was an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Right? And how far does that whole cookie crumble? At the end of the day, in short, Anslinger did cannabis or marijuana to him a huge service. He mythologized it and nationally publicized it more effectively than an advertising campaign. And certainly, much of his erstwhile sales pitch did alarm people. There were others who questioned his propaganda and wanted to know the truth. And so it lives on. Here we are, 2024, and Anslinger, this, power-hungry dude that just absolutely was not only pitted against, another federal agency to get more funding, to get more status. This guy was just out for blood without any good backing, without any good purpose. And a lot of the stigmas, a lot of the, issues that we face in our country today are thanks to that one guy. And that's pretty impressive. So again, what can we do is not let history repeat itself and not let ourselves not have any ideas to exactly what caused this problem in the first place. And, to be able to somehow lobby for all kinds of legislation because you had other kinds of influence and because you were just hell-bent on finding a way to win, regardless of if it was true or not, lying under oath. I mean, those are federal crimes in and of themselves. So, Harry J. Anslinger shaped cannabis history, suppressed it for about 100 years or so here in the United States of America. Still fighting out of that, but it's on a different path now. And exposing, every single part of it is that basically all of the agendas that are looking to line their pockets to continue to suppress cannabis are still acting in very similar ways today. So let's not let history repeat itself. Let's be better. Follow the data, follow the truth. And we got that here for you. Shop High Horse, vote Estes. See you this weekend at the block party. All right, so moving on to our community spotlight brought to you by the Big Chicken Farm. Cool event I wanted to share with y'all, and that is the Mock It Till You Rock It New Mexico event, Las Cruces Public Schools Career Readiness and Student Success Recruiting Event. Professionals to interview high school juniors for mock interviews. So I think, they are still looking for professionals to help with the mock interviews. I'm going to be there next Tuesday, 9 a.m. to 2. Again, this is important to me because I see vital opportunities to help our up-and-coming workforce, right? It's a very interesting time of your life to get a job, a very interesting time of your life to start assuming some responsibility. And the sooner that you can get that wake-up call, the better. So let's help empower our youth. Let's ask the right questions. Set them up, hopefully, for success. It doesn't always happen the first time. All right, so that's our community spotlight. And last thing in our Men's Health Minute, guys, I appreciate anybody who hung in there with that story. But I definitely think people need to go do their independent research. Highly recommend reading that book, Cannabis: A History, because it really takes it all the way down, to, times that are practically, ancient. However, the most relevant times that are still absolutely plaguing our society today. The last thing in our Men's Health Minute, talking about vitamin D metabolites and sarcopenia in older men. Anyways, The link between vitamin D metabolites and muscle mass or strength remains controversial. It was explored men over the age of 70 years old from 2005 to 2007 from Concord Health and Aging Men Project were assessed at baseline and 5 years later. The main outcome measurement was the incidence of sarcopenia defined by the Foundation for the National Institute of Health Sarcopenia Project as appendicular lean mass, body mass index ratio less than 0.789, and grip strength less than 26 kilos. These included serum 25 delta and your 125D levels measured at baseline, categorized into quartiles: age, income, season of blood collection, physical activity, vitamin D supplement and medication use, measures of health, parathyroid hormone, renal function, albumin, and white blood cell count. So sarcopenia, right, reduced muscle mass and strength was present in 9.2% of men at the 2-year follow-up and in 14.3% of men at the 5-year follow-up. Excluding the men with it, at baseline, vitamin D levels in the lowest quartiles were independently associated with the incidence of sarcopenia over 5 years after adjustment. Low serum 125 and 25D concentrations at baseline were independently associated with the incidence of sarcopenia over subsequent 5 years. It's conceivable that maintaining vitamin D sufficiency may reduce the incidence of reducing sarcopenia in aging men. So, what do I say there? Take vitamin D supplementation. Check your vitamin D levels first and make sure you're right, especially if you're hitting that age of 70, right? Oftentimes you do see women on vitamin D, and for, maybe a pride aspect, sometimes, for instance, men do not quite like to take vitamins and things like that. And they're like, well, I don't need it, or whatever. I don't want to spend money on it. Vitamin D, unless everybody's outside and getting the nutritional adequate intake, each and every single day, vitamin D is a great supplement for men and women, especially as you age, right? And we've seen correlations with vitamin D and COVID and all kinds of other things, but I think it's a very important vitamin. So again, if you want to get supplementing on it, get the blood levels, talk to your doc, check again after a couple months, go from there. Make sure you're right where you need to be. And otherwise, hope everybody has a great night. Hope you learn a little something. Hope you do your own research.